the thing I keep seeing on a lot of videos now. People put it on chopsticks, cards. Yeah.
Yep.
It was one thing that led to another. After I graduated from school, I started doing freelance writing. And then a lot of the articles that I normally would assign to me were articles that were related to Binondo or history of Manila. So kind of that's how I ended up with my email address as Mr. Binondo, because the article that would open the door for me for any publication is usually about Binondo. Eventually, it was around the mid-2000s that I got to meet people like Carlos Cedran, Ivan Mandi, who were starting their walking tour. So they saw my article, we talked, and they both offered me to work for them as a tour guide, since I already had the knowledge about the city of Manila and the history of Binondo. But eventually I ended up working for Old Manila Walks. So that's how it started. I was with them up until last year when I decided that I would leave and start my own. When I worked on my narratives for the tour, I usually realized that there were a lot of the guides out there, they don't normally cover a lot of the questions that people have in their minds, like when they're going around certain areas, like why is this street named after this person, who is this person, and all that. So some of them came from articles that I was assigned to write. So I ended up finding out this information in my research. Some of them came up when I was reading or researching or talking with other historians. Then I came to know this information or that information. Usually I would check, but sometimes I would state the fact and I would be corrected by guests, like, oh no, it didn't happen that way, it happened like this, oh no, it's supposed to be like this, not that. So I would get correct. Then I would use that in my future tours. You learn from the guests as well. I'm still doing a lot of research, and sometimes I would be reading books about, let's say, a topic like that's not totally about Binondo, like say the history of medicine in the Philippines or clothing, how clothing changed, and I would just come across an information. For example, what happened to Rizal's family after he was executed? They actually opened businesses around Binondo. So that was an information, and then that led to more questions like what kind of businesses they were and what the nature of those businesses were. Like one of them, I think she ended up selling fabrics around Binondo. And then when I read through another book, I got an idea what it's like to be someone who sells those fabrics, the nature of work that they do, what's their business network like. So it kind of gave me an idea, this is how in-depth this research is. But I don't throw it all during the tour because it would overwhelm the guests. So I try to figure out like, okay, this might be of interest to you, so that I would share a little fact like this or something like that. So. The owner knew I was a photographer, so they seen my work. So that's when they decided, like, what, can you share your photos with us and exhibit it? Like, yeah, no problem. And at that time, I was just finishing one photo exhibit at the Manila Clock Tower Museum. They chose some of that collection, and then we added a few more. So that's how it ended up. Okay, so in 2024, I was offered a photo exhibit in this coffee shop. So while we were working on curating the photos, I realized that a lot of the scenes that I took were no longer or could no longer be taken again, because for one reason or another, like accessibility is no longer allowed, something has been built to cover it up, or that area has changed. So that gave us the title for the exhibit, which is Binondo Everchanging. So the coffee shop asked me, why don't you do a catalog to explain all the stories behind the photos? But then as I was working on it, it kind of grew. It kind of made me realize how much Binondo has changed. So I decided, like, since no one has ever sat down and actually wrote a book, a history book about Binondo itself, I said, why not kind of combine both and then show how Binondo has been changing. Now, the funny thing is when the book came, so I decided to self-publish the book, and when it first came out, one of the first by her comment was that it's like the effort of the heritage advocate people, conservation people in the early days. I thought that should not be a bad thing, because I now realize that every generation or every few years, there's still people who ask the question, why do we need to conserve all these buildings? What's the purpose of this? And hopefully my book will do that. Aside from telling people, this is the history of Binondo. This is how Binondo has been changing. So this will give you an idea how Philippine society changed. So through the years, and maybe in the future another photographer writer will do their own take on to continue where my book is going. It's like I started photography 20 years ago, and then since I didn't have a lot of time because I had work and all those things, I would practice photography around Binondo. So a lot of those photos from the last 20 years, me practicing photography, came from, that's what ended up in the book. Some of those, like I would think, oh, that building will be there forever, and not realizing within a few years after I take a shot of that building or that bridge, it would be gone. So then I realized, yes, Binondo has been changing. So when I was compiling photos from the book, it was a surprise. Like I was able to take shots of buildings that are no longer there, or structures that have long since gone, or restaurants that have closed down since then. So. When I started the book project, I made a decision that I'll do self-publishing. I won't work with a printing house or institution, because I want my voice to come out. So if I work with them, they would probably tell me to do things, for example, shorten the history part, and so that the book would be thinner and that it will be sell fast, we could charge it lower and things like that. So no, let's just do this, because like this is my one chance probably to do this thing at this point in my life. So that's why I had to self-publish it, but there were challenges. For example, the writing and the research part, that was easy. It was the layout, yes, we handled that. The problem was after the book came out, we had to do things, for example, like apply for an ISBN, that's so that it could be sold to libraries, and libraries could know how to catalog it. So I had to fill out all the paperwork, and that was not easy. Getting registered with the NBDB, before it was not so easy. I heard now that they said they'll help you do it if you go to their office in Quezon City. They'll help you fill out all the forms. What else was not easy? Raising money to have the book published. It's like I had to look for someone to subsidize. Otherwise, I would be charging it at a much higher rate in order just to recoup my investment. So, but then also I had to make the decision that the book, if I'm doing the self-publishing, it will come up in small batches. So why? Because I don't have storage spaces. I had done before, when I tried to do some business, I made the mistake of overproduction, and that lasted me a long while, and didn't have the storage space, and some of the merchandise were damaged while in storage. So it's like I'll keep it low. Then that way we'll print as the demand necessitated. So. There's the First United Building and also Binondo Church. Many people, when I do my tours, people are often surprised at what you can find inside, because people know where it is, but people don't stop and go in and explore it. They think it's just another typical neighborhood church, not realizing that if you go inside, you can find, if you know where to look, you will find things like the oldest painting in the Philippines. You can see why the church is very historic. If you learn the story, then people are usually like, wow, I didn't know that about Binondo Church. So, and it's very under the radar for a lot of people. Another one of my favorites will be the First United Building. It's over 100 years old. It used to be called the Perez San Manilio. It has a lot of stories that has happened. Then if you go there, there's a museum there that you can view and learn more about its history. So it has seen many different aspects of Philippine history, like in entertainment, retail, Filipino-Chinese history. It has touched that building in one way or another. And I'm glad that the building admin now know its worth, and they're doing ways and finding ways to connect it with the creative community of Manila. And if you go there, you'll be surprised to find things like graphic design studios, photography studios, even a pottery studio. So it's finding a new lease of life. The term is called adaptive reuse. It's like you take an old building or a building that has been around for a while and repurpose it. Maybe you could make it will still be the same purpose, but in a slightly different format. There's this old wooden building not that far from Binondo Church, and it used to house the Pansiteria Macanista, which Rizal wrote about in the El Filibusterismo. So it's an old restaurant. I remember seeing it as a child. I remember passing by it. It wasn't anymore a restaurant. It was now been repurposed for so many other things. In my book, I kind of tell the story, like what other things that you would have seen in that building. And someone showed me photographs of what the building looked like up close, and there were details that we didn't notice before. So that building is like, okay, it's historic and everything, but the problem is the current owner of the building for all intents, seems to just want to demolish it and rebuild it from scratch. There have been attempts I have been hearing from, let's say, institutions, government agencies that have been wanting to buy the buildings outright from its current owner. But the problem is that the owner, he's not in the mood to sell, which doesn't make sense because he cannot demolish the building. It's a difficult issue. Like, there have been a lot of agencies and institutions that have been trying to figure out how they can save that building from being demolished further. Recently also, there was a house of, I forgot his last name, Sunico, the bell maker. His house was recently up for well, some say demolished, some say it was going to be reinstalled elsewhere. But that's the problem we have here in Binondo. There are buildings like, yes, we could save them and repurpose them, but the problem is, how do you make it work? Who will be the one to foot the bill for things like maintenance, rebuilding, future land taxes, all these things. So, but there have been some success. If you look at my book, I showed you some successful stories. Like, for example, the former headquarters of HSBC has now been turned into another Cafe 1919. And China Bank, when the pandemic started, China Bank decided that it will restore it and upgrade its old former headquarters in Binondo for the future. So there are some attempts, but the problem is not all building will be able to survive. So, and then it's a matter of like, how do you adaptively reuse? Like I mentioned earlier, First United was it's repurposed itself as a creative hub, aside from being an office building. So it has found a new lease in life. But what about other buildings? What can they do? Recently, I was invited by a professor inside UST, and she was teaching a class on adaptive reuse. So the students were divided into groups, and they were trying to figure out, like, they had to look for an old structure which they had to find adaptively reused. Some of them were like, it's very obvious, but no one ever thought about it, like repurposing an old house to become a community center. Because everyone in the community know where the house is, but the house eventually now could be a storage for the memories of that neighborhood or that district. That's a very incredible idea. That's a very nice, doable idea. Others were like, you going through, oh, why don't we turn it into another B&B or another hotel? Maybe. But then I point out, like, okay, you like the structure, you want to do it like this, but the problem is the ground floor gets flooded. You're gonna have to pay more to fix this and do that. So we talk about all the being realistic about doing these projects. So it's hard, but it's not only Binondo that's struggling with it. Like, there are even the cities like Valenzuela has been struggling with it in passing. Like, they're trying to repurpose old houses into community museums, or in the case of Valenzuela, they're trying to build an image for their identity for their city. So they restored the house of Pio Valenzuela as a museum. So people, like, okay, this is where Valenzuela started. This is where Valenzuela got its name, from this revolutionary. So, but that's the importance, because now communities are seeing if we preserve the past, we will create an identity, and this identity is important for us to attract businesses, to stand out from the rest of the city or the metropolis area. We have an identity, it will build community pride. I've been writing about Binondo and heritage and architecture for the longest time. I kind of come to the point in my life, it's like sometimes eventually you have to let it go. If we've done everything in our power to prevent it from happening, but yet it still happened, then probably it was not meant to be, and we have to say whatever we can and move on. So that's for me. I mean, like, yes, it would be great if like institutions and companies would save some of these old buildings and repurpose them, but that's not going to happen for every one of it. Oh yeah, one is the Crystal Arcade. A story about that one. It's one of the. It was built in the night before the war by the son of Juan Luna, Andres Luna de San Pedro. But the book is currently 347 pages, and it's supposed to be probably more than that. But the critters told me you can't have any more information. You can't add any more pages. It's not going. You can't bind the book properly. You're gonna have to do it in 2 volumes. Like, oh yeah. So I had to take a lot of things out. So that one I couldn't talk about, the Crystal Arcade. And also, but there were other topics I couldn't cover as well. Like, for example, the volunteer firefighters of Binondo. So that one didn't got in as well. So hopefully in the future somebody will write a more in-depth than what I have done here in Binondo. But I feel like my book kind of shows the path for future writers and researchers. Okay, this is the path you're gonna have to go down when you write about the history of Binondo. Right now, Binondo is pretty much popular for people to visit. Okay, people come here on weekends. I would like to see that balance with a better living standard for us. So, like, if you talk to Jancy, there would be issues for us, like for society and for example, crime and security issues. I mean, like now it's pretty safe to walk around even late at night because there's a lot of CCTVs. There's barangay tanods. But sometimes people still don't feel safe, or the safety for the tourists. I mean, I don't see it a lot, but some people feel like we need to boost this up if we're to maintain Binondo's popularity as a tourist spot. I would like to see Binondo being more serious about taking care of its culture, its architectural heritage, things like that. These are things I could hope for, but it may or may not happen. When I was younger, when I was a kid, people who grew up here, we don't really talk about heritage and culture. It was more about business, but I would like to see also in the future, like, we create a unique Chinoy identity. Something like I noticed that's what some of the current generation, they're trying to fight for, or they're trying to aim for, like, what is unique about being Chinoy, and how can I add my voice? How can that be recognized not only by Philippine society, but by other Chinese community as well, that how different and unique we are. So that's something I like to see also. I haven't had an official book launch yet. So we were thinking of doing it here, but the problem is we haven't settled the time and how we're gonna do it. So we're kind of keep pushing it back. So I'm kind of like, do I still need to, the Dolly and Feeling, they never had book launches. Oh nga naman. So the Bible never had a book launch. So, but if you want to get a copy, you can come here to Apologue. You can buy it here, or you can, if you're living outside the Philippines, check with my buying bookstore. They sell it online. What to expect if you get my book? Basically, the first 5 chapters talk about the history of Binondo, so you can learn it through visually how Binondo evolved from the middle of the Spanish period all the way up until the World War II. Then the other half of my book are my photos and how I was able to document the changes in Binondo in the last 20 years. So one of the things that you will learn if you buy my book, there's so many things that you will see there, is that whereas during the Spanish period, you will learn that Spain did not allow the Filipinos to participate in Chinese culture. But then with chapter 6, then you will see how Filipinos today participate or get involved in Chinese culture. I just basically focus on three things: dragon dancing, Chinese opera, and, and dragon boat racing. So these things, you think it was supposed to be the Chinese community itself were taking the lead, but in reality, it is the Filipino community that's actually supplying the dragon dancers. The most of the dragon boat rowers are actually Filipino. Most of the Chinese opera performers are actually Filipino. So you can see like it's a 180-degree shift in a different direction. So now a lot of Filipinos are participating or aware of Chinese culture.